Hello and welcome to BioRules video lessons. Today we are going to be talking about energy in the ecosystem. In the ecosystem there are two things that we have to be aware: energy and matter. So energy, what is it necessary for? For endergonic reactions or reactions that require energy. Usually we call them in chemistry the endothermic reaction. We need that for anabolism, which is endergonic. We need that for movement, which is endergonic. Anything that the organism needs that requires energy, we need to get it from somewhere. Matter, on the other hand, they are for building molecules. They are going to be building proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and the classic, the most important ones, the ones more numerous, are hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. So we are going to be talking about matter later. But today, let's talk about energy. Where organisms get energy. Most organisms on our planet, like plants and like algae and some photosynthesizing bacteria, get energy from sunlight. Yes, sunlight is the main energy source for most ecosystems on the planet. They get energy from sunlight in a process called photosynthesis. So plants get energy from sunlight in the way of photosynthesis, put into their bodies. That's how we get energy. The grass cannot live happily and freely just after got this energy, because there are organisms that have specialized in getting energy from plants or from other organisms that got energy from the sun. So here we have an example, a little hare that is going to be eating the grass. And also there are animals that have specialized in eating animals that eat the plants. So here we have a lynx making this food chain over here. So basically all an ecosystem on Earth might be powered by the energy that's coming from the sun. Actually, most ecosystems, 99.9 lots % of the Earth's ecosystems depend on sunlight for absolutely every single piece of energy that's contained in its living organisms. There are exceptions, so let's take a quick look on an exception here. A very famous exception for an ecosystem that exists entirely without using anything coming from the sunlight are deep sea vents. Very deep in the oceans, we are talking here about 2,000–3,000 meters deep or more, there are little vents. They can be something around 5, 10, 50 meters tall. So they are small volcanoes that are exhaling water at very high temperature. And together with that water, there are some chemicals that bacteria use to get energy from the environment, transforming heat and these chemicals into energy. And an entire ecosystem, like we can see here with octopus, tube worms, dandelion, some fish, shrimps, crabs, they live exclusively from the energy that those bacteria were capable of getting from these vents. Okay, there is a site in National Geographic, you can see here with this link, that has videos and other links and animations and stuff about this. If you're curious about, have fun. If you want to visit one of them, they are easy to find, but not very easy to get there, because they are very deep in the middle of the ocean, in the places where the tectonic plates meet. So, yeah. Okay. So, but let's go back. Let's talk about most ecosystem, land ecosystem, oceanic ecosystems that depend on light. So we have a grass that's eaten by the hare, that's eaten by the lynx. So we are going to be calling each of these groups a trophic level, which in biology is going to be the place in the food chain. Okay, so basically who is going to be eating whom. So trophic comes, it's a name that comes from nutrition. So basically this is a nutrition level. So in this image you have 3 trophic levels, and these 3 trophic levels over here, they are being represented by the grass, the hare, and the lynx. However, there are different trophic levels and they get energy in different ways. So the first one over there is the producer. Grass is a producer because it kind of produces its own chemical energy by transforming inorganic energy, energy from the sun, in the case of grass, into chemical molecules that are going to be used for its life. This trophic level is also known as autotroph. Auto, because this trophic level gets energy by itself. Not by itself, it gets from the sun, but it doesn't depend on another trophic level. It depends only on that one trophic level. That's why I call it autotroph. If this one is the autotroph, the other trophic levels above the producers is going to be the heterotrophs, because they depend on energy that comes from another trophic level. The hairs depend on the energy from the grass, the lynx depend on the energy from the hairs that got from the grass. Okay, so they are called heterotrophs. But the heterotrophs also have individual names. So the first trophic level there is the producer. The second trophic level, the hair, is the primary consumer, is the first consumer. Herbivores are usually primary consumers. And we have there a predator that is the primary consumer, so it's going to be a secondary consumer. So this is nomenclature that we're going to be using in a food chain. So when we name these levels of energy in the food chain, then we have there a food chain. That's it. Grass that gives energy to hair, that gives energy to the lynx. So the arrows here are representing the flow of energy into an ecosystem, the flow of energy into a food chain. Okay, so let's take a closer look here on the way of energy transfer. So the sun gives energy by photosynthesis to the grass. Very good, we already saw that. And then this energy is passed on to the next trophic level by the process of feeding. So the grass feeds the hair, or the hair eats the grass and gets energy from it. And then the hair feeds the next trophic level, which is going to be the lynx. So energy enters the trophic levels by photosynthesis. They are passed on by the way of feeding. But the transfer is not perfect. Energy from the grass is also spent to do its own life, to make chemical reactions that require energy, to create movement, to create whatever. They are going to be transforming part of that energy into heat. So energy is lost at every single trophic level by the way of heat. So this is why we don't say that the energy cycles, because the energy doesn't cycle. The energy in an ecosystem, it flows. Okay, energy is going to be flowing because it enters from the sun, it goes passing by the way of feeding, and it leaves by the way of heat. And ultimately, the heat escapes off and goes toward the universe and doesn't come back. Ecosystems don't manage to get this heat from living organisms back into the system. So this is a very important characteristic of ecosystems. The energy on it flows. Remember that. Okay? So let's put here our food chain again, grass, hair, and the lynx. And now let's represent the flow of energy on it, taking into account how much heat is being lost. So we have here grass, have lots of energy, you have lots of grass around. No, if you go there to a forest, to a savanna, you're going to have lots and lots and lots of producers, and there's a lot of energy that passes to the herbivores, in this case here the hair. But much more energy passes than what's being passed by feeding. Lots of energy they are lost by the way of heat. Okay, so heat here, especially as a byproduct from cell respiration, wastes a very big portion of the energy available in a trophic level. So actually the grass is not going to be giving all its energy to the next trophic level, the hair. Most of its energy goes away to the universe in the way of heat. And the same for the hair. The hair might give some energy by the way of feeding to the lynx, but most of the energy is going away by cell respiration in the way of heat. And the lynx as well is going to be getting energy, but going to be putting energy away. So energy enters by the way of photosynthesis, but is always going away. So because of that, we are going to say that around 90% of the trophic level's energy is going away in the way of heat. Cell respiration spends, wastes, whatever you want to name it, 90% of the energy of each trophic level. That means that only 10% of the energy passes on to the next trophic level. So it's a small amount that passes, it's a lot that is lost. Okay? So if we want to represent the amount of energy, there is a way, a convention, that we can use solid bars like this one here. In this case here, I'm representing the amount of energy in the producers, 10 million kilojoules per square meter per year. This is a unit of energy per area per time. So it's kilojoules is the standard for energy, square meter is standard for area, per year is standard for time. So this trophic level every year deals with, this example here, 10 million kilojoules per square meter. So the hairs over there are going to be getting energy from the grass, but not going to be getting everything, because about 9% goes away, so only 10% stays in the next trophic level. So the bar here in the next trophic level is going to be smaller. It's going to be 10 times smaller in this example. It's only 10% has passed to the next trophic level. And the next trophic level the same. If you have a certain amount of energy there, the next bar is going to be about 10 times smaller than the second trophic level, because only about 10% of the energy passes to the next trophic level. That's why we have a pyramid. The energy is always reducing from one trophic level to the next. Okay? So there we have an energy pyramid. Very good. Another example here of energy pyramid. They put here the sunlight, but we're not going to be worried much about sunlight, because sunlight gives way too much energy to planet Earth. Okay, so we start thinking on a pyramid from the producers. You have there the primary, it's a producer, the autotroph, 10,000, then you have 1,000 in the primary consumer, then you have 100, then you have 10. So what we see here is that we are losing 9%. We have 10 times, 10% only the energy is going to the next, so the energy gets reduced 10 times, reduced 10 times, reduced 10 times in every trophic level. As a result, because of this incomplete energy transfer, the size of the trophic, the food chains is going to be limited. There's a limit on how long a food chain can be. In this one here, you have four links. We have a producer, primary, secondary, tertiary consumer. We have 4 trophic levels. Okay, so a good example on how this here can be illustrated if you get places with different productivity on planet Earth. So a tropical rainforest, there, like we have there in Amazon, like we have there in the heart of Africa, in Indonesia, those places have a very high productivity. They are very humid and they have lots of sunlight, very big incidence of sunlight. As a result, they have a very big primary productivity. If they have a very big primary productivity, they have a lot of energy to be given to the next trophic level, and then to the next, and then to the next. In this example, we have a food chain with 5 trophic levels. That's quite long. If you get a taiga, like the forest in the north of Canada, in the north of Europe and north of Asia, there in Siberia, we are going to be having less energy, okay? Because although it's kind of moist around there, it is going to be receiving a smaller incidence of sunlight. So as a result, you start with less energy. If you start with less energy over there, you end up having less trophic levels. The food chain length is limited. And if you get a place with even smaller productivity, like deserts, like the desert in Atacama, Namibia, the Australian outback, Sahara, the Middle East, they have a small primary productivity, not because of light, but in this case here because of water. There's not enough water for plants to be doing the photosynthesis and growing their bodies. And because they start with a little bit of energy in the producers, then you have less trophic levels. In this example here, you have 3 trophic levels. That's why you have a gigantic biodiversity around the tropics over here in tropical rainforest. We have a much smaller biodiversity in the taiga, in the coniferous forest, and a very small biodiversity when you get there to the desert. So different amount of energy is going to have a different length of food chains. The food chains are going to be longer if they have more energy, and there is a limit. You're not going to be finding food chains with 10 links because there's not enough energy in the planet to feed a primary consumer that feeds a secondary, tertiary that will feed the ninth-ary consumer. There's not enough energy for that. Okay, just taking a look again on the shape of these pyramids. This one here has put the detritivores and decomposers together there, but these guys are tricky because decomposers, they usually decompose this, but they can decompose that, they can decompose that or that. They can even decompose themselves. No, decomposer decomposing other decomposers that have died. So usually most food chains are not going to be representing using a pyramid, putting the detritivores in there. Okay, but let's go back to the shape of the pyramid. What is the typical shape of pyramid? Oh, does it look like that? Or does it look like this? Or does it look like that? Those are three pyramids. However, as we saw the rule of about 90%, it's not going to be this one, and it's not going to be this one, because from one trough level to the next, the reduction is about 10 times. You lose about 90% of the energy. So the shape of the pyramid is very sharp. It's not a classic pyramid. It's a very sharp, very accentuated change in the size of each trough level pyramid. Okay. So here I'm representing another pyramid just for you to see. I'm using, this is a real environment pyramid. 52,334 kilojoules per square meter per year. And we have there the producers, we have the primary consumers, we have the secondary consumers, secondary, tertiary consumer, and this one here is going to be even having a little bit of quaternary consumers. So this here is a typical energy pyramid. This also explains why you have a very small number of very tall predators. If you go into a forest, you're not going to have many jaguars. In an area the size of the city of São Paulo, you're going to have less than a handful of jaguars living in there. Why? Because the amount of energy doesn't allow a very big population. You have big animals, they are big because they are predators. They evolved to be eating others, to be big, but they are not going to be very numerous. So this is the reality in terms of food. The higher you go, safer you are in terms of more animals you can eat in the bottom or more plants or whatever, but more vulnerable you are going to be because the energy gets scarcer and scarcer and scarcer. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, when you make an energy pyramid, it's similar to an energy of biomass, a pyramid of biomass. A pyramid of biomass represents very fairly what happens in an environment because biomass is very closely related to the amount of energy contained in a place. But it's very different from a number pyramid. If you count the number of organisms, sometimes it can work well. You have lots and lots and lots of grass, you have many insects, you have a few birds and very little foxes predating the birds. But sometimes the number pyramid can be misleading, like we are going to be seeing in the next slide. Okay. Also, pyramids, they have the shape. If we assume that they are closed, so energy is not getting in and energy is not getting out, apart from the heat that's now escaping to the universe, and also within a reasonable time frame. Let me show you examples about this. Number pyramid. If you have a producer that's a tree, one tree can feed millions of insects. So very few trees can feed many insects. So wait, our pyramid just got inverted here. And the many insects are going to be feeding some birds, and the some birds are going to be feeding very few foxes. What we see here is that we have an inverted pyramid because in that case, although one tree has a gigantic biomass, a gigantic amount of energy, if you count numbers only, this pyramid can be weird. That's why usually you don't use number pyramids. We prefer energy or at least biomass pyramids. Okay. The other thing that we said that the ecosystem cannot be open, because if it's open, if energy enters in the middle of the process, like for example, you have a producer and then you have a primary consumer that's arriving from another environment. Let's say there's a current bringing zooplankton into a certain place. Boom, now you have much more primary consumer than you had of producers. And then this misleads us thinking that you have much more energy in the second trough level than you have in the first one. Although the rest of the pyramid is the same, this is misleading because it's going to be quite inverted because of this entering of energy. So this misleads us. So we have to assume that the pyramid is representing a quite closed ecosystem. Okay? And the last one that I mentioned is that the time frame should be reasonable. If you get a small time frame, for example, 1 day, phytoplankton grows and dies and grows and dies very, very quickly. So in 1 day, phytoplankton gets born, many of them die or feed the next trophic level, and then they grow again and they keep growing, growing, growing. So if you get just a snapshot of 1 day, we are going to say that we have much more zooplankton in that environment than you have of phytoplankton. But actually this is not true, because the phytoplankton is growing and growing and growing and growing. So if you had a bigger time frame, this would be a different picture. You're going to have much more energy in the bottom than you have in the rest of the food chain. So because of this, we also don't like trophic levels represented by a pyramid with a very small time frame. That's why I use year. Year is a good, reasonable amount of time, the amount of energy present in a certain area in 1 year. That would be the good stuff. Okay. Finally, not every ecosystem, actually very few ecosystems are going to have food chains, because a food chain is no grass that feeds the rabbit, that feeds the hawk in this example here. But actually, sometimes you have one producer feeding more than one animal, and one animal feeding more than one predator. So usually you have no more complex relationships, like this here. No, a food web compared to the food chain. Actually, a food web is like if you had many food chains, one after the other, all interconnected with each other. This here you have a producer. Okay, we have one producer, this ecosystem, apparently there's only one grass. That also usually doesn't happen. Usually have many species of producers. But in this case here you have the producer. And this producer is feeding the grasshopper. So the grasshopper is a primary consumer. It's also feeding the rabbit, which is also a primary consumer. Which is also feeding the mouse, which is also a primary consumer. Well done. Then the primary consumer is feeding, the grasshopper is feeding the lizard, so the lizard is a secondary consumer. The mouse is feeding the snake, so the snake is a secondary consumer. And the the grasshopper and the mouse and the rabbit, they are all feeding the hawk. So the hawk is also a secondary consumer. However, the lizard, which is a secondary consumer, is also feeding the hawk. And the snake, which is a secondary consumer, is also feeding the hawk. So the hawk is actually also a tertiary consumer. So the hawk, in this example, is at the same time a secondary and a tertiary consumer. So food webs can be a little bit confusing because you may have organisms that are in more than one trophic level. So this is something to be aware of. Just one more example. Here you have two producers, grass and a tree, and they are producer, and we have the yellow arrow showing the energy being transferred from these producers to the primary consumer. Hey, look, we had there energy going to the primary consumer. And from those guys, energy is going to the next trophic level. So the blue one is going to be representing the energy going to the secondary consumer. And from those over there, you're going to be having energy going to the tertiary consumer. So you have now organisms like the owl over there or the hawk, that's at the same time secondary and tertiary consumer. And actually, if you take a look on the spider is a secondary and tertiary consumer, and is giving energy, no, not the spider, this insect over here. The insect is secondary and tertiary consumer, and is giving energy to the spider over there. So that process, the spider is already a tertiary consumer, but it's also getting energy from a tertiary consumer, so it's also quaternary consumer, in the same way as this bird, which, by the way, is also feeding this guy over here. So you have that guy over there to be maybe a quaternary consumer as well. So food webs sometimes can be a little bit confusing with a little bit too many relations. So we should be able to trace which trophic level each one of those is. Okay? I hope you had fun with this lesson. Now we have a quick quiz here for you to show that you have understood and you learned something. See you next class.